Double time is the mod that increases the map speed by 1.5 times. Apparently, it used to increase the speed by 2x, and that's why it's called double time, but I'm not sure if that's true or not. Either way, 1.5 times speed still might be too fast for certain players on specific maps. This is where variable DT speed comes in. Within Osu Lazer, they have been adding customization options for many different mods, DT being one of them. In my previous video, I talked about difficulty adjust and the implications of giving such customization options to the player, so this video will serve as a continuation of that discussion, with the focus on DT and Mania. Double time has such a huge barrier of entry for lesser experienced players. If you're new to speed, you instantly become restricted to a small number of maps you're able to play from. The approach rate of the map can also have an effect as most maps start to go above 10 with DT. You do see players just brute forcing it though, and spamming DT maps, even if they can't hit streams and burst patterns until they finally become good at it. I noticed this too during the past few months of mainly playing DT. As you get used to alternating higher BPM jumps, you start building up the ability to handle triplets and even small streams, but majority of these maps do feel pointless to play, as the moment there's a stream longer than 5 nodes, you're basically missing everything. Variable DT allows the player to gradually get into higher speed practice, while also being able to keep the map relatively playable, yet pushing on the limits of their comfort zone. This also grants the player the ability to gain performance points from maps that were either too easy or too hard with normal DT. If you aren't exactly fast enough to play the map on 1.5, then you can bump it down to 1.4 or 1.3 and set a score that way. For the more experienced players, you can crank the slider up to 1.7 or 1.8 and challenge yourself on an easier map. As you can see, this provides a great amount of flexibility when it comes to adjusting maps for your preferred skill range. But of course, something like this doesn't come without a whole host of caveats. Now I can understand what they were going for. When the numbers are like this, the math is straightforward and easy to understand, but there are some inconsistencies. The slider for DT moves in 0.01 increments, while the score multiplier changes for every 0.1 increment. This means you can have a 0.01 speed change difference between two scores, and even a 0.09 speed change be worth the same. An immediate solution would be to lock the rate changes to 0.1 increments, as I honestly don't think there needs to be this much granularity anyway. This would reduce the number of possible rate combinations by a factor of 10, and simplify the variation between using different DT rates. I know there's a lot of players who are practicing speed and get so caught up in playing exactly 200 BPM or exactly 222. You really don't need to sort of precision when it comes to stuff like this, and it's better to aim for a range or a threshold of BPM that you allow yourself to play. As most songs are different BPM anyway, it would be too much work exactly changing the rate for each separate song to get a specific speed. Also, side note, why doesn't DT show the adjusted AR or OD? When it comes to comparing scores on the same map with different rates applied, we run into an issue similar to difficulty adjust. The whole point of having mod multipliers is to give a sort of leniency or reward to the player for achieving a score with more difficult mods. The system that they've implemented seems to be going for that, but again, it's not exactly this simple. Going from 1.4 to 1.6 probably isn't the same as jumping from 1.6 to 1.8, yet they're rewarded the same amount of score difference. In fact, the speed increases and difficulty a player faces might even be exponential as you keep increasing, or at least not as linear as the multiplier would suggest. And this can even get further complicated on a per map basis. Some maps might not even be that much harder as you keep increasing the speed versus a more rhythmically complex map, yet in both cases you're rewarded the same amount of bonus score for the mods. It also seems to undermine highest speed scores, as 2x speed only grants a 1.2 score bonus, so just imagine getting beat out by a player on 1.8 or 1.7 speed simply because they had an easier map. PP does a better job of determining difficulty and your performance on said difficulty, so spamming the highest DT 90% accuracy scores doesn't automatically grant you the highest PP. If we use this as our metric, then maybe a 1.7 or 1.8 scores should rank higher than a 2x score, as they display a higher level of performance. Or maybe on some other maps, the 2x score is ranked on top, because it does display a higher level of performance and difficulty, even with 90% accuracy. The more I make these videos, the more it seems like PP should be the determining factor for leaderboard placement, as that's the one metric we can use and apply across all maps. But something like this could detract from the per difficulty and per mod performance on said scores. And this also has massive implications when it comes to Osu Mania leaderboards, which we'll get into now. So the spring spotlight is going on at the time of making this video, and it seems like double time was enabled for the playlist. Now, I wasn't aware of this when I set my first few scores, and this happened. Needless to say, I was pissed. Because this is a screenshot, I can't look at what rate they used for DT, but I'm fairly sure it was 1.2, so that would be a 1.04x multiplier, meaning their score would be this? Again, this could be wrong because I don't exactly remember the rate, but even if we look at the PP difference, it's their 173 versus my 143. Even though both the score and PP are high for their scores, I think we can all agree that this looks a bit odd. One of my favorite aspects of the seasonal spotlights were how the first 4 maps were always accessible and really rewarded playing to your best ability and accuracy. With these changes implemented, it seems like anyone can just slap on a double time rate and achieve one of the high scores with the lowest accuracy possible. This then pushes everyone else into feeling like they need to play on the highest rate possible just to keep up with everyone else. The whole point of the spotlights were to really highlight hand-picked quality maps and play them in a low-stakes competitive environment that fit the theme of the season. With everyone slapping on 2x rate and blazing through them, not even really hitting the notes, that kind of detracts from that. This is an issue that will even spill into general map leaderboards. Most Mania players are used to maps being capped at 1 million score. Even with double time applied, we're generally okay with it being a 1x multiplier. This sort of provides its own challenge in a way, and it's rewarding to beat someone's no mod score with double time. If we take a look at leaderboard scores in Quaver, they're all based on QP, which is like their version of PP. As you can imagine, every single easy or normal difficulty map is filled with 2x rate mod scores. For most of these easier maps, you do still see perfect scores being in first place, but anything slightly difficult and it starts to detract from the whole niche of accuracy scores. While it's nice to have these more skillful and higher caliber scores being ranked accordingly, we do lose out on the more perfect scores that can come from playing the map as it's originally intended. This also poses the question of what to do with current stable scores. We could have two separate leaderboards, where one is the stable scores or laser scores with classic mod. These could keep the original 1x multipliers for both DT and non-DT, capping the score at 1 million, and the other leaderboard for rate change scores that have a multiplier rewarding above 1 million points, both of which could grant a #1 score on someone's profile. This does get a bit weird though. What happens if a player plays with both classic mod and no mod in laser? Which score would take precedence in the leaderboard? Should leaderboard placements be based on PP to get rid of any inconsistencies with the different raid mod multipliers? Would that get rid of the whole genre of accuracy leaderboard farmers? I honestly don't know what to suggest or what to think about any of this, and I really don't care for speed monkeys spamming 2x and playing maps completely inaccurate. I do have some thoughts about Hard Rock, although this is a bit off topic. If any mod were to get a mod multiplier, I'd love to see it with HR. The balancing would make a lot more sense here, and it would seem worthwhile comparing higher accuracy scores and perfectness when it comes to the top scores on the leaderboard. A PP bonus would also be appreciated, but I don't think any of that's happening anytime soon. Lastly, I want to mention halftime, since it behaves similar to DT rate changes. This seems like a vastly underutilized and underappreciated mod that could help players get into some more complex and dense patterns. You can really take the time to comprehend and practice patterns on a fundamental level, and really avoid any bad muscle memory habits that could develop from playing too far out of your skill range. If you're a score farmer like me and just completely avoid these tens of maps that are above 6 and 7 stars, you would now be able to submit scores on them. Like variable DT, halftime also has issues, but of the inverse. Slowing down a map just a tiny bit grants way much more playability and potential PP from the map. For example, I played the map on both 1.0 and 0.9. This is the difference of setting a 1 million score or a 900k score for the max score. Yet it was a 71k score difference and a 5% accuracy increase simply from lowering the map by 0.1x. I appreciate the access this gives to harder maps, but this does create a sort of annoying environment of lowering and raising the map's rate to find the perfect balance of the maximum achievable score versus the performance you could do on said rate. But with all things, you gotta take the bad with the good. As mentioned earlier, the slight score decrease for what grants a massive amount of playability doesn't seem balanced at all. There should really be a way harsher score reduction for when you do decrease the speed. Even in current stable, a lot of these farm maps grant way too much PP on halftime. When slowing down the map, this little amount causes it to play so much easier. I don't know how they calculate the PP based on reducing the speed, but there could be some adjustment made when understanding the difficulty between variable speeds. Either way, that's all the points I have to make. I can imagine we'll begin to see more discussion about PP-based leaderboards once people start submitting a lot of scores in laser, as well as what's going to happen with legacy scores and such. If you have any thoughts or suggestions about this topic, please leave a comment. I guess the next step would be to look at the implications of Score V2 in laser, or maybe the scoring system in general. So stay tuned for any future laser-related videos.